We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. It's only 9 words long, but it says so much, doesn't it? We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children. And as you may have gathered, we're flipping the script and doing the Pride Month update first today. Now, if you're the same age as I am, you remember a world where there were only really 2 or 3 gay pride parades in the whole country every year. San Francisco's always had one, because of course they have. And LA and New York came along a little later, but for the whole time I was growing up, and a fair bit of my adulthood too, that was it. And the parades themselves were rather starkly different in character. Back then they mostly consisted of fairly normal-looking, well-dressed people walking down the street holding hands with their same-sex partners. Fast forward to the present day, and you don't need me to tell you what the average pride parade looks like. They are basically open-air public sex orgies done with the explicit approval of local government and law enforcement. So where just 8 or 10 years ago, if a naked middle-aged man was waving his genitals in the faces of small children in the middle of a public roadway, that man could have expected to be swiftly arrested and to spend a not insignificant portion of the rest of his natural-born life in prison where he damn well belongs. And not a single person, gay, straight, or otherwise, would have objected to that pervert pedophile scumbag being taken off the street and removed from polite society. And if you've seen the bit of viral video that's been making the rounds from the Seattle Pride Parade the other day, that is exactly what you saw. A fully naked man around the same age as me, waving his sex organs at small children and evidently having the time of his life while doing it. It goes without saying that this man's actions violate pretty much every public decency law on the books, but we know how this drill goes by now. Public decency laws, like a whole host of other types of laws, simply don't apply to you if you are a member of a group that the Democrat Party considers a part of its coalition. So if you're a gay exhibitionist pedophile sex pervert, you can do pretty much any damn thing you want, any damn where you want, as long as it's being done in the context of the depraved public sex orgies that we euphemistically refer to as pride parades. And it was at the New York City public gay sex orgy, pride parade, where we heard that now infamous chant, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming in your children." Coming for your children. Bit of a Freudian slip there. And that chant, in and of itself, is a potent reminder of a fact that you often hear me reiterate, that the difference between crazy right-wing conspiracy theory and verifiably true fact about the world is always under 5 minutes. For years and decades now, the sex pervert industrial complex has been flatly insisting that their movement has nothing to do with grooming children and recruiting them into non-normative sexual lifestyles. Shut up, homophobe! All we want is the government out of our bedrooms. All we want is our privacy and to be left alone. Which is about as believable at this point when they say it as it is when the Duke and Duchess of Douchebag say it. We've flown here to Africa accompanied by the entire World Press Corps to tell you all how very badly we want our privacy. Why can't you monsters just leave us alone? When we're on our 3rd worldwide press junket of the year, you should all be ashamed. And it's no less absurd, obviously, trying to play the "we just want the freedom to love in private" card when the highlight of your entire year is parading down Main Street, USA in a leather harness and nipple clamps while flagellating the exposed backside of your best friend with a cat o' nine tails. It's a rather counterintuitive way of asserting your desire for privacy, is all I'm saying. And it might sound strange to say, but I think we should actually be encouraged by how obscene and disgusting and depraved these pride parades have become this year. Because these deviants know in their heart of hearts that the clock is about to strike midnight for the sex pervert industrial complex. And whatever public goodwill these things used to enjoy is now well and truly gone. So they're acting the way that all cornered, wounded animals act. They know this is probably their last chance to have their government-sanctioned public sex orgies, and they're going to go out kicking and screaming and chanting and flagellating. And to the extent that these open-air mobile sex orgies we used to call pride parades ever enjoyed widespread public approval, It was largely a result of apathy and inattention. Up until now, most people at least tacitly approved of the concept of pride parades because they didn't know what really went on there. Because in the abstract, from 30,000 feet, there's nothing very objectionable about gay people wanting to have a gay parade once a year. Even though there is something intrinsically weird and disordered about wanting people to cheer for your sexual proclivities. If it's just a thing they're doing once a year and they're not involving little kids in it, then who cares? Let them have their dumb gay parade. It's a free country, right? But that has all changed rather markedly this year. Changed a whole hell of a lot, in fact, because ordinary people, normal, decent people, they're now paying attention in large numbers to what actually goes on at these things. It is really easy to say, sure, I support gay pride parades, but it's much more difficult to say that when you are watching a naked, middle-aged pedophile waving his tallywhacker in the faces of 7- and 8-year-old children. It's much more difficult to say that when you see a crowd of transvestites shouting at the top of their lungs, yeah, Mom and Dad, you bet your ass we're coming for your kids. Each and every one of these events has to be permitted each and every year. And you know when it stops? It stops when in every town and city in America, when it's time for the local council to consider the Pride Parade permit for this year, that meeting is inundated by normal, decent citizens who refuse to have their town be a venue for a public gay pedophile sex orgy and are willing to say so. We don't have to tolerate this stuff. In fact, we have a moral obligation not to tolerate it. Democracy works. There are vastly more normal, decent people than there are deviant pedophile sex perverts. And when those normal people start putting in just a little bit of effort to assert that their normalcy and decency, when they come back to the realization that communities are allowed to have reasonable standards of public decency, that they don't have to bend over backward to accommodate other people's weird, creepy fetishes, then it's game over for the sex pervert industrial complex. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we deal with child sex predators the old-fashioned way by turning them into the anatomical equivalent of a Barbie doll, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And given the current goings-on in Russia this week, I think it's fitting that we make mention of a certain anniversary in Russian history, for it was 118 years ago today that the mutiny on the battleship Potemkin took place, which can be seen as a sort of a bookend event with the Kronstadt Rebellion, which we talked about on its own 118th anniversary about 3 months back. It was those two naval mutinies taken together that kicked off the Russian Civil War of 1905, and there's still really no consensus among historians about whether there were two distinct Russian civil wars in 1905 and 1917, or whether it was all just one big civil war, but that's a semantic distinction that doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of difference anyway. We talked in the Kronstadt Rebellion episode about the doomed voyage of the Russian 1st Pacific Squadron, where a force was detached from the Baltic Sea Fleet and sent on an 8,000-mile disastrous shit show of a voyage to go do battle with the Imperial Japanese Navy off the southeastern coast of China, where they promptly got their ass kicked up one side of Tsushima Strait and down the other in the most decisive defeat ever inflicted by one modern navy upon another. And it's also the only engagement in history wherein two fleets of modern warships engaged in a line of battle action of the type that used to be fought during the Age of Sail. It was a decisive victory for the Japanese and just as decisive a defeat for the Russians. There was no reason for them to keep fighting the war after that point, but the Russians were so humiliated after Tsushima, since it was the first time Europeans were ever defeated by non-Europeans in any kind of naval action, they quite stupidly decided to keep fighting in the hopes of salvaging some small vestige of their shattered masculinity. And that was the proximate cause of both the Kronstadt Rebellion and the Potemkin Mutiny. The Baltic Fleet mutinied first up in Kronstadt, but that petered out after a few weeks. Then the Black Sea Fleet, of which Potemkin was the flagship, mutinied when rumors started circulating that they were going to be sent on a duplicate voyage just like that of the 1st Pacific Squadron, to go fight the same Imperial Japanese Navy that had just sent the best part of the Baltic Fleet to the bottom of the sea. And perhaps not unreasonably, The sailors and petty officers and some of the junior officers in the Black Sea Fleet said, "Nah, dude, that ain't happening. We got no desire to sail halfway around the globe just so we can get blown to shit like the other guys did. We're not going to pointlessly sacrifice ourselves just to assuage the bruised egos of the Tsar and the Admiralty." And so the conspiracy was duly hatched and the date of the mutiny was set. But the reasoning behind it didn't have solely to do with disagreements over naval tactics and strategy. Many of the main instigators were communist revolutionaries. And they saw the low morale of the fleet as a great opportunity for instigating a mutiny, which it was hoped would be the spark that would set off a proper civil war whereby the Tsar could be duly overthrown. And they did wind up getting their civil war, but it took another 12 years and another disastrous war from the Russian perspective, the First World War in this case, to succeed in ousting the Tsar and installing a communist regime. The date of the mutiny was set for Wednesday, 28 June 1905, but matters came to a head the day before, on 27 June, when the Potemkin was doing gunnery drills off the Ukrainian coast. When practice was over and it was time to sit down for supper, the sailors noticed the borscht they were about to eat was made from rotten, maggot-infested beef, and many of them, not unreasonably, refused to consume any of it. The captain and the senior officers could sense that their authority was being quickly eroded, that there was a whiff of mutiny in the air, and they decided that drastic, iron-fisted measures needed to be taken in order to reassert proper naval discipline, which, with the benefit of hindsight, was probably the absolute worst way they could have chosen to handle the situation. The executive officer of the ship, Commander Ippolit Giliarovsky, he then appears on the mess deck and announces, with a detachment of Marines, and announces that any sailor who refuses to eat their rotten, maggot-infested supper will be deemed guilty of insubordination and summarily shot without the benefit of a court-martial. At this point, one of the ringleaders of the mutiny, a fellow by the name of Grigory Vakulinchuk, says something the XO doesn't like very much, so Giliarovsky unholsters his sidearm and promptly shoots the son of a bitch, mortally wounding him in the process. At this point, the rest of the mutineers decide, you know what? We were going to do this tomorrow, but now that one of our leaders is lying on the deck bleeding to death, let's say we accelerate the schedule by 24 hours. And so, within the next 10 to 15 minutes, Commander Giliarovsky, Captain Evgeny Volokov, and 7 of the 18 ship's officers are duly killed and their bodies tossed over the side. The Russian naval ensign is hauled down and replaced by the red banner of communist revolution, and Potemkin, now being commanded in true communist fashion by something called the Central Committee of the Social Democratic Organization of the Black Sea Fleet, because collective command of a warship is such a splendid idea. What could ever go wrong? She spends the next couple weeks cruising from port to port to port, trying to foment socialist revolution from offshore, which winds up working surprisingly well. The communist agitators who are onshore, they see the most powerful ship in the Russian Navy out in the harbor flying the red banner, and that emboldens their revolutionary fervor. But the mutineers don't want to push their luck too hard. So after a couple of weeks of offshore revolutionary rabble-rousing, they decide discretion is the better part of valor, and they make their way to Romania, where they are duly granted asylum. Most of them remain there for the rest of their lives, working in shipyards, getting married, raising families, and so on. A few of the more gullible junior officers are lured back to Russia with the promise of a general amnesty, but I think you probably know where this story's going. As soon as they step 1 foot across the border, they are apprehended and hanged as traitors within a matter of hours. And what's this all got to do with present-day events in Russia? Well, as we've established, every time there is a Russian civil war, it starts with some sort of military mutiny. It starts with ordinary Russian soldiers and sailors saying, you know what? Our leaders are idiots. They don't have the faintest idea how to run this war, and I don't want to sacrifice my life on the altar of their hubris and incompetence. And that equation can get even dicier when much of your fighting force is composed of mercenaries from a private army, as Russia's fighting force in Ukraine currently is, or was up until last week. And up until last week, you probably thought it was the Russian army doing all the fighting in Ukraine, but no, it ain't. And look, if you're one of those dumbass neo-Cold Warriors who spend your lives comically overplaying Russia's military strength, these next few minutes will probably leave your knickers in one hell of a twist, so consider this your trigger warning. Imagine if the CEO of BlackRock announced that he was going to march his army on Washington and take over the government. And now imagine the president actually having to take that threat seriously. That would be pretty weak and sad, wouldn't it? For that matter, imagine this scenario while you're at it. Imagine if the U.S. Army was trying to conquer Mexico for 17 months and they were still no closer to accomplishing the task. But that's exactly what happened to Vladimir Putin last week. The guy who's the Russian equivalent of the BlackRock CEO, Yevgeny Prigozhin, whose private army has been doing much of Russia's fighting in Ukraine for the last almost year and a half. He came to the same realization that the Potemkin mutineers did 118 years ago. Our leaders are fools, this war is unwinnable, things are only getting worse, and this shit ain't worth dying for. And if you're in the neo-Cold Warrior crowd, I know what you were screaming at your screen right now. But Russia has nukes! That means we have to be terrified of them. That means they are our legitimate military adversary. Now look, if you want me to react to that argument with anything but uproarious laughter, maybe show me some evidence that any significant portion of Russia's theoretical nuclear stockpile is in an operational and deliverable condition presently. And then show me some evidence that the guys they have running their nuclear stockpile are any better at their jobs than the rest of the morons who are running this embarrassing shit show of a war. Russia tries launching a nuke at something, I say the odds are significantly better than 50-50, that the only people they wind up annihilating are themselves. And Lindsey Graham, if you're watching, I want you to take some deep breaths and maybe go walk around the block once or twice. I can see the veins bulging out in your forehead, and your face is a very unnatural shade of purple right now. I know you've spent your entire career in the Senate trying to make people irrationally terrified of Russia's military prowess because you're a pathetic stooge for the defense contractors, and that's how you make money for yourself, by lying out your ass and dreaming about killing Ruskies. And don't be shy, you neo-Cold Warriors. Light up those comments. Tell me how full of shit I am, and I will continue politely requesting some evidence, any material evidence whatsoever from anywhere, that Russia's actual military prowess comports in any way with your assessment of that prowess. If I am as wrong as you think I am, it should be a very simple request. But I suspect all I will get is the same thing I always get from you people. You're a Russian troll! You're a stooge for Putin! Shame on you! I bet you play chess and drink vodka when nobody's looking, don't you? I bet you even chase moose and squirrel! Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. I will see you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn!